My husband's heart stopped beating at 3:47 a.m., right there in my arms, in the hallway of St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, Oregon. I felt it, the exact moment the rhythm changed from struggle to silence. His chest stopped rising. His fingers, which had been gripping mine, went slack. And in that frozen second, when the world turned into a slow-motion nightmare, when I screamed for help and nurses came running with crash carts and urgent voices, one nurse, a young woman with kind eyes and trembling hands, leaned close to my ear and whispered 6 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. "Ma'am, that's not your wedding ring." I didn't understand at first. My brain couldn't process. David was dying, maybe already dead, and this woman was talking about jewelry? I looked down at his left hand, still warm in mine, and saw the gold band glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. Of course it was his wedding ring. I'd placed it on his finger myself, 32 years ago, in a small church in Salem, surrounded by white roses and the smell of my mother's perfume. I knew that ring. I'd watched it catch the light at dinner tables, seen it tap against steering wheels, felt it brush against my cheek during 1,000 kisses. But the nurse was right. The ring on his finger wasn't the one I'd given him. That ring had a tiny engraving inside. "Forever, Sarah." This one was smooth, unmarked, slightly wider, and as doctors pushed me aside to work on David's failing heart, as they tore open his shirt and pressed paddles to his chest, as the machine screamed its flat, endless tone, I stood there frozen, staring at that ring, and felt my entire world crack open like thin ice under heavy boots. They worked on him for 47 minutes. I counted every second, watched them pump his chest, inject medication, shock him once, twice, 3 times. His body jerked with each jolt of electricity, but his eyes stayed closed. His face remained peaceful, almost serene, as if he'd already left, and what lay on that gurney was just an echo of the man I'd loved, or thought I'd loved, or loved in the way you love someone when you don't know they've been living a double life. When the doctor finally stopped, when he looked at me with those tired, sad eyes and said, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison, he's gone," I felt nothing. Not grief, not shock, not the overwhelming wave of loss I'd expected, just a strange, cold numbness that started in my chest and spread outward like frost on a window. And underneath that numbness, something darker, sharper, rage. The nurse who'd whispered about the ring stood in the corner, watching me. She looked young, maybe 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and freckles scattered across her nose. She kept wringing her hands, kept opening her mouth as if to say something, then closing it again. Finally, she walked over, touched my shoulder gently, and said, "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. Not then. Not like that. I noticed, and I thought you should know." "Know what?" My voice sounded strange, hollow, like it was coming from someone else's throat. "What do I need to know?" She glanced at the doctors who were removing equipment, covering David's body with a white sheet. Then she looked back at me, and I saw something in her eyes, pity mixed with something else, fear maybe, or guilt. "I was his nurse 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. "When he came in for chest pains, he was wearing a different ring then, the one with the engraving. I noticed because he kept twisting it, nervous, you know? And he told me it was from his wife, that you'd been married forever. He seemed so happy when he talked about you." My throat tightened. So when he came in tonight, cardiac arrest, I saw the ring was different, and I wondered. I mean, people don't usually change their wedding rings unless... She trailed off, looking miserable. "Unless they're hiding something." I finished the sentence for her. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally breaking through the shock. "Where's his wallet? His phone? His things?" She hesitated, then pointed to a small plastic bag on the counter. "Everything's there. The police will need to..." I didn't wait for her to finish. I grabbed the bag and tore it open. Wallet, keys, phone, watch. His phone was locked, of course. I tried his birthday, our anniversary, our daughter's birthday. Nothing. 3 attempts, and it locked me out completely. But the wallet? The wallet was easier. I flipped it open, and there, tucked behind his driver's license, was a photograph. Not of me. Not of Emma, our daughter. A woman I'd never seen before, dark-haired and laughing, standing on a beach somewhere sunny. And behind her, smiling with his arm around her waist, was David. My David. Wearing the wrong ring. My name is Sarah Ann Harrison, and until that night, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I'm 54 years old, though people usually guess younger. I've been blessed with good genes, and a skincare routine I've maintained religiously since my 30s. I live in a modest but comfortable 2-story house in the suburbs of Portland, the kind with a maple tree in the front yard, and a garden I tend every Sunday morning. I worked as a library assistant for 27 years at Jefferson Elementary School, helping children find books about dinosaurs and fairy tales, reading stories in funny voices during summer programs, organizing book fairs with that particular joy only a lover of literature can understand. David and I met when we were both 22, at a mutual friend's barbecue in 1993. He was charming in an understated way, not flashy or overwhelming, but steady, reliable, with kind eyes and a quiet sense of humor that made me laugh. He worked in construction management, something practical and secure. We dated for 2 years, got engaged on a camping trip to Crater Lake, married 6 months later. Our daughter Emma was born 3 years after that, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. We weren't rich. David's job paid well enough for us to live comfortably, but we were always careful with money. We drove used cars, took modest vacations, saved for Emma's college fund. When Emma went off to Seattle University 5 years ago, the house felt too big, too quiet, but we adjusted. David started working longer hours, taking on bigger projects. I threw myself into my library work, into my book club, into learning watercolor painting on Wednesday evenings at the community center. We had date nights every Friday. Nothing fancy, usually just dinner at Romano's Italian restaurant downtown, the place with the checkered tablecloths, and the owner who knew us by name. We'd split a bottle of red wine, share a tiramisu, talk about our week. Or at least, I talked. Looking back now, I realized David mostly listened, nodded, smiled in the right places. He rarely volunteered information about his own days, his own thoughts. I'd chalked it up to him being a quiet person, the kind who processes internally. Now I wonder what he was hiding. Our life wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was comfortable, predictable, safe. We fell into patterns. Him reading the newspaper at breakfast while I made coffee. Me doing crosswords before bed while he watched whatever sports game was on. We kissed goodnight every evening, a quick peck on the lips that had become more habit than affection. We hadn't made love in over a year, maybe longer. I'd told myself it was normal, that couples our age simply had different priorities. I'd never suspected, never even imagined. The night he collapsed, we'd been at Romano's for our Friday dinner. David had seemed distracted, checking his phone more than usual. When I asked if everything was okay at work, he smiled and said everything was fine. Just a difficult client demanding changes to a project timeline. He'd ordered the seafood pasta. I'd gotten the chicken marsala, our usual orders. We'd shared a bottle of Chianti. He'd seemed perfectly normal, perfectly David, right up until we got home and he grabbed his chest in the kitchen, face going pale, and said, "Sarah, something's wrong." I'd called 911 immediately, held him as we waited for the ambulance, rode with him to the hospital, gripping his hand, telling him he'd be fine. We'd get through this. Everything would be okay. The doctors said it was a massive heart attack, that his arteries were severely blocked, that they'd do everything they could. They rushed him into surgery. I waited in that horrible room with the uncomfortable chairs and the coffee that tasted like burned cardboard, praying to a God I'd stopped really believing in years ago, making bargains and promises if he'd just let David live. But David didn't live. And now I stood in that hallway, holding a photograph of my husband with another woman, wearing another ring, and I realized I'd been praying for a man who didn't exist. Or maybe he did exist, but not for me, not in the way I'd thought. The nurse, her name tag said Jennifer, stood nearby, clearly unsure what to do. "Do you have someone I can call?" she asked gently. "Family? A friend?" I thought of Emma, asleep in Seattle, completely unaware that her father was dead, and her mother's life had just imploded. I thought of my sister Rachel in Phoenix, who'd call me dramatic and say I was overreacting. I thought of my book club friends, who knew me as quiet, pleasant Sarah who always brought homemade cookies and never caused trouble. "No," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's no one. Because how could I call anyone when I didn't even know what to say? How do you tell people that the man you spent 32 years with was a stranger? I didn't go home that night. I couldn't bear the thought of walking into our house, seeing his reading glasses on the side table, his slippers by the bed, his coffee mug still in the sink from yesterday morning. Instead, I checked into a Holiday Inn off the highway, an anonymous room with beige walls and thin curtains that let in too much light from the parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the jeans and sweater I'd put on for our date night, and I stared at David's phone. It was locked, but his wallet told me everything I needed to know. Besides the photograph, I found a second credit card I'd never seen before, issued in his name but sent to an address in Lake Oswego, not our house. A membership card for a gym I didn't know he belonged to. A business card for a jewelry store in downtown Portland, with a woman's name, Catherine, written on the back with a phone number. I called Emma at 6 a.m., just as the sun was starting to rise. She answered on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mom? What's wrong? How do you tell your daughter her father is dead? How do you choose those words?" "Emmy," I said, using her childhood nickname. "I need you to sit down. Something happened last night." I heard rustling, her boyfriend murmuring something in the background. Then Emma's voice, sharper now, alert. "What is it? Are you okay? It's your dad. He had a heart attack at the hospital last night. They tried everything, but..." My voice cracked. "He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The sound she made was primal, a cry that went straight through my chest. I heard her boyfriend asking questions, heard Emma trying to catch her breath, and all I could do was hold the phone and wait for the storm to pass. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small, broken. "Where are you?" "I'm coming. I'll be there in 3 hours. Just tell me where you are." I gave her the hotel address, told her to drive carefully, told her I loved her. I didn't tell her about the ring, the photograph, the credit card. Not yet. Let her grieve for the father she thought she knew. There would be time later to destroy what was left of his memory. After we hung up, I tried David's phone one more time, desperate. I tried our address as the password, the numbers of our house. Nothing. I tried his mother's birthday, his father's birthday, every significant date I could think of. Each failed attempt felt like another betrayal, another reminder that I didn't know him at all. Then I remembered something. 2 years ago, David had started playing golf more regularly. He joined a club, said it was good for networking, for his business. He'd come home with stories about other guys, about rounds and handicaps in tournaments. I'd been happy he had a hobby, something to do on weekends when I was busy with my own activities. Now I wondered if he'd ever actually played golf at all. I found the club's number on his keychain, Riverside Golf Club, and called. A pleasant voice answered, "Riverside Golf Club, this is Melissa speaking. How may I help you?" "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Sarah Harrison. I'm calling about my husband, David Harrison. He's a member there." "Oh, Mrs. Harrison." "Yes, of course. How can I help you today?" The familiarity in her voice surprised me. She knew who I was, or knew who David had told her I was. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. David passed away last night. Heart attack." Silence. Then, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe it. He was just here Wednesday. He seemed fine. He was with..." She stopped abruptly. "He was with who?" I asked, my heart hammering. I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison. I shouldn't have said anything. I just meant he seemed healthy, that's all." "Please," I said, and I hated how desperate I sounded. "I need to know. Who was he with?" Another long pause. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her internal debate. Finally, "He was with a woman. Dark hair. They come in together most Wednesdays." I assumed. He always introduced her as his wife. Said you loved golf. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." I ended the call. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone, watched it bounce on the cheap hotel carpet. The woman in the photograph. The woman he'd introduced as his wife. The woman who wore his real wedding ring while I got the replacement. How long had this been going on? How many lies had he told? How many Wednesdays had he spent with her while I thought he was networking, building his business, securing our future? And more importantly, did everyone know except me? Were people laughing at stupid, naive Sarah who believed everything her husband told her? I stood up, paced the small room, felt rage building like pressure in my chest. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to go back to that hospital and shake his dead body and demand answers he'd never give. Instead, I sat back down, picked up his wallet again, and pulled out the business card for the jewelry store. Catherine. I'd call her when they opened. I'd ask about the ring. I'd start pulling threads until the whole ugly tapestry unraveled. Because if David thought he could die and take his secrets with him, he was wrong. I'd find out everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment he chose someone else over me. And then I'd decide what to do with the truth. Emma arrived at the hotel at 9:30 a.m., her eyes red and swollen, her boyfriend Tyler behind her carrying an overnight bag. She fell into my arms in the doorway, and we stood there crying together. Two women who'd lost the same man in different ways, though she didn't know that yet. I held her tight, breathed in her familiar scent of vanilla shampoo and lavender soap, and felt my heart break all over again. Not for David, but for her. For the father she'd adored, the dad who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped with her math homework and walked her down the aisle at her college graduation. That man was about to disappear, replaced by a stranger who'd lied to us both. "Tell me what happened," she said, when we finally separated, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed while Tyler made coffee from the room's tiny machine. "Tell me everything." So I did. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. The dinner, the collapse, the ambulance, the hospital, the flatline. I left out the ring, the photograph, the phone call to the golf club. I told myself it was to protect her, but really it was cowardice. I wasn't ready to destroy her image of her father, not when she was already drowning in grief. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "He seemed fine. We had lunch last month when I visited, and he seemed completely fine. How could this happen so fast? The doctors said his arteries were severely blocked. It had probably been building for years. But he had checkups. He saw doctors. They would have caught it, wouldn't they?" I thought about all the times David had said he'd been to the doctor, shown me prescription bottles for blood pressure medication, cholesterol pills. Had he actually gone? Or were those appointments just more lies, more opportunities to be with her? Whoever she was? "We need to call people," Emma said, wiping her eyes. "Grandma, Aunt Rachel, his work friends. We need to plan a funeral." Oh God, a funeral. How do we even start? I looked at my daughter, 27 years old, smart and capable, but completely unprepared for this. Neither of us was prepared for this. "We'll figure it out," I said, though I had no idea how. One step at a time. Tyler brought us coffee, sat quietly in the corner while Emma and I started making lists. Things to do, people to call, arrangements to make. It felt surreal, organizing a funeral for a man I was increasingly certain I'd never really known. Emma wanted to use the church where we'd gotten married, wanted his favorite hymn played, wanted photographs displayed of our family through the years. Happy photos. Lies frozen in time. Around noon, we went to the funeral home. Emma did most of the talking, choosing a casket, discussing flowers, picking out a burial plot. I sat there nodding, agreeing to things that didn't matter, while my mind kept circling back to that jewelry store business card. Catherine. Who was she? What would she tell me? When we got back to the hotel, Emma had insisted I shouldn't go home yet, that I needed time. I excused myself to the bathroom and called the number on the card. A woman answered. "Portland Fine Jewelry. Catherine speaking." "Hi," I said, keeping my voice low so Emma wouldn't hear through the door. "My name is Sarah Harrison. My husband David recently purchased something from your store. I'm calling about a ring." "Oh," her voice brightened with recognition. "Mrs. Harrison, yes. David mentioned you might call. He was so excited about the anniversary bands he commissioned. They turned out beautifully, if I may say so. He picked them up about 6 weeks ago. Anniversary bands. Plural." My stomach dropped. "Can you tell me, what did they look like?" "Well, they were custom pieces. Matching bands in white gold, wider than typical wedding rings, with the infinity pattern engraved inside. He said it symbolized your eternal love. It was really quite romantic. He seemed very happy with them. Infinity pattern, eternal love. I wanted to laugh, but it would come out as a scream. "Thank you," I managed. That's what I needed to know." I hung up before she could say anything else. Stood there staring at my reflection in the mirror. Pale, tired, older than I'd looked yesterday. Commissioned rings, 6 weeks ago. Which meant this wasn't some recent affair, some midlife crisis mistake. This was planned, deliberate, meaningful. He'd taken time to design rings, to have them specially made, for both of them. A second wedding maybe, or a renewal of vows that had nothing to do with me. I thought about our 32 years together, how I'd put my dreams of getting a degree on hold when Emma was born, how I'd worked part-time at the library so I could be home when she got off the school bus, how I'd scrimped and saved to help with her college tuition, how I'd supported David through career changes, through the years when construction was slow and money was tight, through his father's death and his mother's declining health. I'd been faithful, devoted, present. I'd given him everything I had, and he'd given me lies. A placeholder life while he built something real somewhere else. Emma knocked on the bathroom door. "Mom, you okay in there?" I splashed cold water on my face, took a deep breath, opened the door. "I'm fine, honey. Just tired." But I wasn't fine. And as I looked at my daughter, at her trusting face and her red-rimmed eyes, I knew I'd have to tell her eventually. Just not today. Today she could mourn her father. Tomorrow, or the next day, or whenever I found the strength, I'd tell her the truth. And then we'd both have to figure out how to grieve a man who never really existed. The funeral was on Thursday, 5 days after David died. 5 days I spent moving through the world like a ghost, making arrangements, accepting condolences, nodding while people told me stories about what a good man David was, how lucky I'd been to have him, how rare it was to find love that lasted 3 decades. Each word felt like a knife, each well-meaning platitude another layer of suffocation. Emma stayed with me at the hotel those first 2 nights, then insisted we go home. "You need your own space, Mom. Your own bed. Being here isn't helping." So we went back to the house, and I walked through rooms that felt like a museum of a life that never existed. His shoes by the door, his jacket on the coat rack, the coffee mug he'd used Friday morning still sitting in the dishwasher, waiting to be run. I should have washed it, put it away, but I left it there. Evidence of normalcy before everything changed. On Tuesday, I finally unlocked David's phone, not through some clever password guess, but by calling his cell carrier and explaining my husband had died and I needed access. They'd asked for the death certificate, which I'd just received, and within an hour, they'd reset it. My hand shook as I opened it, unsure if I was ready for what I'd find. I found everything. Text messages to Catherine, not the jeweler, but the woman herself. Hundreds of them, going back 3 years. Casual messages about dinner plans, about missing each other, about a weekend getaway to Cannon Beach. Messages that said, "I love you," and "can't wait to see you tonight," and "she has no idea." She, me, Sarah, the oblivious wife who packed his lunches and did his laundry and believed every lie that came out of his mouth. There were photos too. The 2 of them at restaurants I'd never been to, at events I'd never heard about, at a cabin somewhere in the mountains. Her name was Catherine Walsh. She was 48, worked as a real estate agent, had 2 grown sons from a previous marriage. According to their messages, David had told her he was separated from me, that we were getting divorced, that he was just waiting for the right time to make it official. Separated. Divorce. Words he'd never once mentioned to me. I called the number in his phone. She answered on the second ring. "David?" Her voice was soft, hopeful. Then, "Who is this?" "This is Sarah," I said. "David's wife." His actual wife, the one he was still married to when he died. Silence. Long, terrible silence. "I'm sorry," she said finally, and she sounded genuine. "I didn't know. He told me you were separated. He said you hadn't lived together in over a year. We had dinner together the night he died," I said, my voice cold. "Friday night date. Same restaurant we've been going to for years. We slept in the same bed every night. We were not separated." "Oh my God," her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I would never... I'm not that kind of person. I swear I didn't know. Maybe she didn't. Maybe David had lied to her too, told her whatever story would make this okay in her mind. Or maybe she'd known and chosen to believe what was convenient. I'd never know. And right then, I didn't care. "Will you be at the funeral?" I asked. I don't know. "Should I?" "Do whatever you want," I said. "But if you come, don't expect sympathy from me." I hung up before she could respond. Thursday arrived gray and cold. Typical November weather in Oregon. The church was full. David had apparently made an impression on people, had friends and colleagues and golf buddies who all showed up to pay their respects. I I sat in the front row with Emma, wearing a black dress I'd bought for the occasion, accepting hugs and handshakes from people I barely knew. Behind me, I could hear whispered conversations, could feel eyes on me, the poor widow who'd have to figure out life alone. Emma gave a eulogy. She stood at the podium, composed and graceful, and talked about her father, the man who'd built her a treehouse when she was 8, who'd stayed up with her practicing for spelling bees, who'd helped her move into her first apartment. Every word was true, and every word felt like a betrayal, because that David existed. He'd been a good father, attentive and present, at least as far as Emma knew, but he'd also been someone else entirely, someone none of us had seen. I scanned the crowd during the service, looking for her, Catherine. I spotted her in the back, partially hidden behind a tall man in a suit. She wore dark sunglasses despite being indoors, her hair pulled back, trying to be inconspicuous. Our eyes met across the church, and something passed between us. Understanding, maybe, or shared rage at a man who'd played us both. After the service, at the cemetery, as they lowered David's casket into the ground, I felt nothing, just that same cold numbness that had settled over me in the hospital. Emma cried into Tyler's shoulder. David's mother, my mother-in-law Margaret, 82 and frail, wept quietly, leaning on her sister. People threw roses onto the casket, said final goodbyes, murmured prayers. I stood there dry-eyed, thinking about the ring on his finger, the one I'd let them bury him with, the wrong one. Let him lie there for eternity, wearing a symbol of the life he'd really wanted, the woman he'd really loved. It seemed appropriate somehow. At the reception afterward, held at our house because Emma had insisted, I moved through rooms full of strangers eating my food and drinking my wine and telling me stories about David. His boss talked about his work ethic. His golf buddies shared funny anecdotes. His cousin remembered childhood adventures. I smiled and nodded and thanked people for coming, playing the grieving widow, while inside I felt myself hardening, calcifying into something new. Catherine didn't come to the reception. I wondered if she was home crying, mourning the future she'd thought she'd have. Part of me, a small, bitter part, hoped she was. When everyone finally left, when it was just Emma and Tyler and me surrounded by empty plates and half-full wine glasses, my daughter hugged me tight and said, "We'll get through this, Mom. It'll be okay eventually." But it wouldn't be, because I had secrets now, knowledge that would destroy her if I shared it, and I had to decide what to do with that knowledge, how to move forward carrying the weight of David's betrayal alone. A week after the funeral, Emma went back to Seattle. She'd offered to stay longer, to take time off work, but I insisted she go. I need to process this alone, I told her. You have your own life, your own grief. Don't put it on hold for me. She'd left reluctantly, making me promise to call every day, to reach out if I needed anything. Tyler had hugged me at the door and said, "Take care of yourself, Sarah, and don't hesitate to lean on us." The house felt cavernous after they left. Too big, too quiet, filled with too many memories that had turned poisonous. I wandered from room to room, seeing everything differently now. The kitchen where David had made his famous pancakes every Sunday morning. Had those mornings been real or just performance? The living room where we'd watched Netflix together, me knitting while he pretended to pay attention. Had he been texting her during commercial breaks, planning their next meeting? The bedroom where we'd slept side by side for 32 years? Had he lain there thinking of her, wishing he was somewhere else? I started going through his things methodically, looking for more evidence, more lies. In his closet, I found receipts stuffed in coat pockets, dinners at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, hotel rooms in Seattle and Eugene and Bend, weekend getaways he'd told me were work trips. In his desk drawer, I found a second phone, an old iPhone with a cracked screen that I hadn't known existed. It was dead, but when I charged it and powered it on, it opened to a photo album full of pictures of Catherine. Catherine at the beach, Catherine laughing at a restaurant, Catherine in bed, the sheets pulled up, looking at the camera with love in her eyes. I should have been devastated. Should have collapsed on the floor sobbing, mourning not just David's death, but the death of my marriage, my identity, everything I'd believed about my life. But instead, I felt something else stirring, something cold and sharp and clarifying. Anger. Pure, focused, righteous anger. I'd spent 54 years being nice, being accommodating, being the kind of woman who kept her voice down and never made scenes and always put other people's needs first. I'd stayed home with Emma instead of finishing my degree. I'd worked part-time instead of pursuing a real career. I'd swallowed my disappointment every time David forgot an anniversary or canceled a date or seemed distracted during dinner. I'd told myself it was enough, that comfortable was good, that asking for more was selfish. And the whole time, he'd been living a completely separate life, planning a future that didn't include me, buying rings and taking trips and building something real with someone else while I sat at home in my library assistant life, reading other people's stories because my own had become too small and quiet to notice. Well, I notice now. I noticed that our joint bank account had been steadily drained over the past 3 years. Not huge amounts that would raise alarms, but consistent withdrawals of a few $100s here, 1,000 there. Money that supposedly went to business expenses, car repairs, golf club fees. Now I knew where it had really gone. I noticed that the house, our house, the one we'd bought together 28 years ago, was only in my name. David had insisted on it years ago. Said something about protecting assets in case his business ever got sued. I'd agreed without question, trusting him, not understanding he was actually protecting himself, making sure I couldn't claim a stake in whatever else he'd built. I noticed a life insurance policy I'd never known about, taken out 5 years ago, that named Emma as beneficiary. Not me, Emma, which meant David had known even then that I wasn't his future, that his money should go to his daughter, but not his wife. Sitting there on the bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of his double life, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The Sarah who'd cried at the hospital, who'd stood numbly at the funeral, who'd accepted sympathy with quiet grace, that woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer, determined to understand exactly what had been taken from me and what I still had left to fight for. I started making lists, the way I'd always made lists, but these were different. Not grocery lists or to-do lists, but evidence lists, documentation lists, lists of every lie I could prove, every dollar I could track, every betrayal I could name. I contacted a lawyer, not the family lawyer who'd handled our wills and Emma's college paperwork, but someone new, someone who didn't know David, who wouldn't look at me with pity and try to talk me out of what I was planning. Her name was Diane Mitchell, and she'd handled several high-profile divorce cases in Portland. When I called and explained my situation, she'd asked, "Even though he's deceased, you want to pursue this?" "I want to know what I'm entitled to," I'd said. "I want to understand my rights, and I want to make sure that if there are assets I don't know about, I find them." "Good," Diane had said approvingly. "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything you've found." I also started watching David's credit card statements more carefully, the ones that came to our house. I'd always let him handle finances, had trusted him completely. Now I scrutinized every charge, traced every pattern, and I found more accounts I hadn't known about, more credit cards in his name, more evidence of a parallel life. The strangest part was how calm I felt, how focused. People talk about grief as this overwhelming, drowning thing, but what I felt was the opposite. Clarity, purpose. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make decisions, wasn't deferring to David's preferences or Emma's needs or what was proper and expected. I was done being nice, done being understanding, done being the woman who accepted what she was given and never asked for more. David had died thinking his secrets were safe. He'd left me behind to grieve the man he pretended to be, to live with the comfortable lie of our comfortable marriage, but he'd underestimated me, underestimated how far I'd go to uncover the truth. I wasn't going to let him win, not even in death. The meeting with Diane Mitchell happened on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after David's death. Her office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and modern furniture that cost more than I made in a year at the library. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit. When I walked in with my folder of evidence, receipts, bank statements, screenshots from David's phones, she didn't offer false sympathy or empty platitudes. She just sat down, opened the folder, and started reading. After 20 minutes of silence, she looked up. "Mrs. Harrison, I'll be honest with you. This is extensive and complicated, but it's also actionable. Meaning your husband had significant assets you weren't aware of, and you have legal claim to them. The house is in your name, which is good, but there's more. She pulled out her laptop and turned it to face me. I had my investigator do some preliminary work based on the information you provided over the phone. David Harrison owned a second property, a condo in Lake Oswego, purchased 4 years ago. He put it in an LLC to hide the ownership, but we traced it back to him. The address on the screen matched the one on the second credit card I'd found in his wallet. My voice came out steady despite the rage building in my chest. What else? A joint investment account with Catherine Walsh, about $200,000 in stocks and bonds. Money that came from withdrawals from your joint accounts over the past 3 years, so legally, half of that is yours. There's also a safe deposit box, registered under his name only, at a bank in Portland. We'll need a court order to access it, but given the circumstances, I don't think that'll be difficult. I sat there absorbing this. David hadn't just had an affair. He'd built an entire second life, complete with property and investments, and plans for a future that didn't include me. While I'd been packing his lunches and washing his clothes, he'd been systematically moving our money, my money, the money I'd helped earn and save over 32 years, into accounts for himself and his mistress. Can I get it back? I asked. The money, the property, all of it? Diane smiled, and there was something fierce in it. We can certainly try. Catherine Walsh will fight us. She'll claim David gave her that money freely, that she had no idea he was still married. But we have evidence to the contrary. Those text messages you found where he refers to you as his wife, where he talks about keeping the affair secret, those work in your favor. As for the condo, if we can prove it was purchased with marital funds, you have a strong case for claiming it. What about his life insurance? The one that names Emma as beneficiary? That's hers legally. But if there are other policies you don't know about, which, given his pattern of deception, is likely, we'll find those too. Over the next hour, Diane laid out a strategy. File a claim against Catherine Walsh for the investment account. Petition the court to access the safe deposit box. Hire a forensic accountant to trace every dollar David had moved in the past 5 years. It would take time, she warned. Months, maybe a year. And it wouldn't be clean or easy. Catherine would likely hire her own lawyer, would paint David as a man trapped in a loveless marriage who'd finally found happiness. The local press might pick up the story. Scorned widow goes after dead husband's mistress, and I'd be subjected to scrutiny and judgment. Are you sure you want to do this? Diane asked, leaning forward. I have to warn you, it's going to get ugly. People will have opinions about you, about David, about your marriage, and it won't bring him back or change what he did. I know, I said, but it's not about him anymore. It's about what I'm owed, what I earned, what I deserve after spending my entire adult life building something I thought was real. Diane nodded, satisfied. Then let's get to work. The safe deposit box was opened 3 weeks later. A judge had granted the order, and Diane accompanied me to the bank, along with a representative from the estate. Inside the small metal box, we found $50,000 in cash, neatly bundled in $100 bills, 2 passports, one in David's real name, one fake, with a different name but his photo, a manila envelope containing photographs of Catherine, love letters he'd written to her, ticket stubs from trips they'd taken together, a second copy of the deed to the Lake Oswego condo, a will dated 18 months ago that left everything to Catherine Walsh. Everything to Catherine Walsh, the woman he'd been with for 3 years, the woman he'd planned to spend his life with once he figured out how to extricate himself from me. I stared at that will, at David's signature at the bottom, and felt something crack open inside me. Not sadness. I was beyond sadness, but a deep, bone-level understanding that the man I'd married had died years ago, long before his heart stopped in that hospital hallway. The David I'd loved had been replaced by this stranger who kept fake passports and secret cash and made contingency plans that involved erasing me completely. This will is invalid, Diane said, reading over my shoulder. He never filed for divorce, so you're still legally his wife. Under Oregon law, you're entitled to at least half of the estate, regardless of what this document says, but it does show intent, which strengthens our case for getting the rest of the hidden assets. The cash, Diane explained, was likely meant as an escape fund. The fake passport suggested David had been planning to disappear entirely at some point, maybe after staging a divorce, maybe after convincing me to sign over more assets, who knew? What was clear was that he'd been preparing for a life that didn't just exclude me, but required my complete erasure. I want it all, I said quietly. The condo, the investment account, every penny he tried to hide. I don't care how long it takes or how ugly it gets. I want what's mine. Diane smiled. Then that's what we'll get. For the first time since David died, I felt something other than rage or numbness. I felt powerful, in control. For 32 years, I'd let David make the decisions, set the direction, control our life. No more. I was done being passive, done being understanding. If he'd wanted to leave me with nothing, he'd failed. I was still here, and I was going to make sure the truth came out, one asset at a time. The next 3 months were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and small victories that added up to something larger. Diane's forensic accountant, a severe woman named Patricia, who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in clipped, precise sentences, traced David's financial movements with the dedication of an archaeologist uncovering artifacts. Every hidden account, every suspicious transfer, every dollar that had mysteriously vanished from our joint checking found its way onto her spreadsheets. The picture that emerged was damning. Over the course of 3 years, David had systematically funneled nearly $180,000 from our accounts into the joint investment portfolio with Catherine. Small amounts, carefully timed, disguised as business expenses or cash withdrawals that wouldn't trigger questions. He'd been smart about it, never taking so much at once that I'd notice, always leaving enough in our account to cover bills and groceries and the mortgage. But he'd been stealing from me, from us, from the life we'd built together. I'd returned to work at the library in mid-December, partly because I needed the routine, partly because I needed the income. David's death benefits were tied up in legal complications. The official life insurance policy that named Emma had been paid out, but there were questions about other policies, about the estate, about whether Catherine had any legitimate claim to anything. Until those questions were resolved, I was living on my library assistant salary and the small savings account I'd maintained separately over the years. The kids at the library asked where I'd been. I told them my husband had passed away, kept it simple, smiled when they drew me cards with crayons and glitter. Their teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled me aside one afternoon and squeezed my hand. "If you need anything, Sarah, anything at all, please let us know. Your family here." Family. The word felt strange now. I'd thought I had family, David and Emma, a neat little unit. Now Emma was all I had, and even that felt precarious. I still hadn't told her about Catherine, about the betrayal, about the secret life. Every time I talked to her on the phone, she'd ask how I was doing, if I was eating enough, if I was lonely in the house by myself, and every time, I'd lie. "I'm fine, honey. It's getting easier. I'm managing." But I wasn't managing. I was plotting, planning, building a case against Catherine Walsh and the ghost of my dead husband. In January, Catherine's lawyer reached out to Diane, a man named Gregory something, with a smooth voice and an oily manner that I could sense even through Diane's recounting of their conversation. He claimed that Catherine had been unaware of David's marital status until after his death, that she'd believed his story about separation and impending divorce, that she was a victim in all this just as much as I was. "He wants to settle," Diane told me during a meeting in her office, "offering to split the investment account 50-50, let you have the condo if you drop any further claims." "What do you think?" I asked. "I think they're scared. If this goes to court, Catherine's reputation gets dragged through the mud. Realtor who knowingly slept with a married man, helped him hide assets from his wife. Even if she wins, she loses. The offer tells me they know we have a strong case." "I want to go to court," I said. Diane raised an eyebrow. "That's a bigger risk. You could lose. The judge might believe Catherine's story, might decide David gave her that money freely and you have no claim to it. And trials are expensive, emotionally draining." "I don't care," I interrupted. "I want this on record. I want people to know what he did, what she did. I want them to have to answer for it publicly." Diane studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but you need to be prepared for what that means. Your marriage will be dissected in court. People will question why you didn't know, why you didn't notice. They'll paint you as naive or willfully blind. Catherine's lawyer will make her seem sympathetic. The other woman who got lied to, just trying to build a life with a man she loved. It won't be pretty. Nothing about this has been pretty, I said, but at least it'll be true. In February, I went to the Lake Oswego condo for the first time. Diane had gotten a court order allowing me access as part of the estate proceedings, and we'd arranged to meet a locksmith there. It was a nice building, modern and upscale, the kind of place I'd never even imagined David could afford. The unit was on the 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The locksmith opened the door, and I stepped inside alone. Diane waited in the hallway, giving me space. It looked like a home. Not a bachelor pad or a temporary hideaway, but an actual home. The furniture was tasteful. A gray sectional sofa, a glass coffee table, artwork on the walls. The kitchen was stocked with food, real groceries, not just bachelor staples. In the bedroom, the closet held men's and women's clothes hanging side by side. David's suits next to Catherine's dresses, his shoes lined up next to her heels. On the nightstand, there was a framed photograph of them together, smiling at the camera, his arm around her shoulders. They looked happy, genuinely, authentically happy in a way I couldn't remember David ever looking with me. Not in recent years, anyway. Maybe not ever. I sat on the edge of their bed, where they'd slept together, made love, dreamed about their future, and I didn't cry. I'd thought I might, thought the reality of it would break me open. But instead, I felt that same cold clarity that had been building for months. This wasn't my failure. This was David's choice. He'd chosen to lie, to steal, to build this life behind my back. And Catherine had chosen to believe whatever story made it okay for her to be with a married man. Now they'd both pay for those choices. I went through the condo methodically, taking photographs of everything: the furniture, the clothes, the kitchen supplies, the toiletries in the bathroom. Evidence that this wasn't some casual affair or occasional meeting place. This was their home, purchased and maintained with my money, my trust, my 32 years of loyalty. Before I left, I took one thing: the photograph from the nightstand. Not as a memento, but as evidence. Proof of what they'd built while I was living in ignorance. Outside, Diane was waiting. "Find what you needed?" "More than I needed," I said. "Let's go to trial." The trial began in late March, on a Wednesday morning that felt too bright and cheerful for what was about to happen. The courthouse was downtown, a stern gray building that smelled like old wood and frustration. Diane met me outside, looking every inch the warrior in her navy suit and red lipstick. "Ready?" she asked. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready, but I nodded anyway. Catherine Walsh sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with her lawyer, Gregory Brennan. She looked smaller than I'd expected, more fragile. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her suit conservative and understated. She kept her eyes down, didn't look at me. I wondered if she felt guilty or just nervous. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Caldwell, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd reviewed the case beforehand, Diane had told me, and had a reputation for being fair but unsympathetic to anyone who wasted her time. Diane presented our case methodically. The joint investment account, funded by withdrawals from my marital accounts. The Lake Oswego condo, purchased with money David had taken from our joint savings. The text messages showing David had lied to Catherine about being separated. The life insurance policy, the secret will, the pattern of deception that had spanned years. Catherine's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim. My client believed David Harrison's representations that his marriage was over. She had no reason to doubt him. She didn't know Mrs. Harrison existed in any meaningful capacity in his life. When she learned the truth, after his death, she was devastated, heartbroken, and completely blindsided. It was a good story. It might even have been partially true. But Diane had evidence to counter it. "Your Honor," Diane said, standing with a printout in her hand, "I'd like to submit Exhibit 17, a text message exchange between Catherine Walsh and David Harrison, dated November 2nd, 3 weeks before his death. In it, Mr. Harrison refers to attending his daughter Emma's birthday dinner and mentions that Sarah is making her famous pot roast. He then says, quote, 'Have to play the part a little longer.' Ms. Walsh responds, quote, 'I hate when you're there with her. It makes me feel like the other woman.' The courtroom went silent. Catherine's face flushed red. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Walsh knew David was still actively living with his wife, Diane continued. She knew he was attending family functions, sharing meals, sleeping in the same house. She chose to ignore those facts because they were inconvenient to the fantasy they'd constructed together. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of testimony, evidence, cross-examination. I took the stand on day 2 and told my story. The marriage, the lies, the discovery after his death. Catherine's lawyer tried to make me look negligent, asked why I hadn't noticed the missing money, why I hadn't questioned David's absences. I trusted my husband, I said, looking directly at the judge. That's what you do in a marriage. You trust the person you've committed your life to. I had no reason to suspect he was lying to me about everything. Catherine took the stand on day 3. She cried as she described meeting David at an open house, how charming he'd been, how he'd told her his marriage had been over for years, that he and I lived separate lives under one roof, while we waited for our daughter to finish college before filing for divorce. She'd believed him, she said, because he'd seemed so honest, so genuine. But you never asked to meet his wife? Diane asked during cross-examination. Never suggested family counseling or mediation? Never questioned why, if they were separated, he still wore a wedding ring when he was out in public? Catherine faltered. He said it was complicated, that Mrs. Harrison, wanted to keep up appearances in the community. So you were comfortable being his secret, Diane said. As long as you didn't have to confront the reality of his actual life, you were willing to believe whatever made it easier for you to continue the relationship. Objection, Gregory Brennan said half-heartedly. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Caldwell said. But the point had been made. The verdict came 2 weeks later. Judge Caldwell delivered it with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd waded through too many messy divorces and estate disputes to have much sympathy left for anyone. This court finds that the investment account in question was funded by marital assets that Mrs. Harrison had a legal right to. Regardless of Mr. Harrison's representations to Ms. Walsh, he did not have the authority to gift those assets to her without his spouse's knowledge and consent. Therefore, the full amount of $203,947.16 is to be returned to Mrs. Harrison. Catherine made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. I kept my face neutral. As for the Lake Oswego property, Judge Caldwell continued, the evidence shows it was purchased with funds withdrawn from accounts held jointly by Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. Title to the property is therefore awarded to Mrs. Harrison as part of the marital estate. Ms. Walsh has 30 days to remove any personal belongings. Your Honor, Gregory Brennan stood up. My client has been living in that condo for 3 years. She has nowhere else to. Your client, Judge Caldwell interrupted, her voice sharp, was living in a property purchased with someone else's money. She has 30 days. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Diane squeezed my shoulder. You did it. Complete victory. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like accounting, like tallying up the cost of 32 years and realizing how much had been stolen, how much could never be recovered. The money was mine again, yes. The condo was mine. But David was still dead, and the life I'd thought I had was still a lie. Emma called that evening. I'd finally told her everything the week before the trial, had sat her down in my living room and explained about Catherine, about the affair, about the money and the condo and all of it. She'd been devastated, furious, heartbroken. How could he? She'd kept saying. How could he do that to you? To us? Did you win? She asked now, her voice small over the phone. Yes, I said. We won. Good. He didn't deserve to get away with it. Even dead, he didn't deserve that. We talked for a while longer, about nothing and everything. And when we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and thought about what came next. I had money now. Enough to be secure, to make choices, to rebuild. I had the condo, which I could sell or rent or burn to the ground for all I cared. I had the truth, documented and verified and legally recognized. What I didn't have was David. But then again, I never really had him at all. 6 months after the trial, I stood in the empty Lake Oswego condo with a real estate agent named Brenda, watching her measure rooms and take notes for the listing. Catherine had removed her things within the 30-day deadline, quietly and without drama. She'd left the furniture, whether out of spite or practicality, I didn't know and didn't care. I'd donated it all to a women's shelter. Every piece. Let it help someone who actually needed it. It should sell quickly, Brenda said, her voice bright with professional optimism. Great location, move-in ready. The market's strong right now. You'll probably get asking price. Maybe more. I nodded, only half listening. I'd already decided what I'd do with the money from the sale. Half would go into savings. Actual savings that only I controlled. The other half would fund something I'd been thinking about for months. Going back to school. At 55, I was finally going to finish the degree I'd put on hold 33 years ago when I got pregnant with Emma. Literature and creative writing. Because if I'd learned anything from this nightmare, it was that life was too short to keep putting your dreams on hold for other people. I'd also quit my job at the library. Not out of bitterness or pain, but because I realized I'd been playing small for decades, accepting part-time work and modest ambitions, because that's what was expected, what was safe, what allowed me to be the supporting character in David's story. I was done being a supporting character. Emma had taken the news about her father hard, but she was resilient, and she'd surprised me with her fierceness. "You deserve better than this, Mom," she'd said during one of our long phone calls. "You've always deserved better. I'm just sorry it took something this awful for you to see it." She was right. I had deserved better. I deserved honesty, fidelity, respect, partnership, all the things I'd given freely and never received in return. But more than that, I deserved to stop waiting for someone else to give me permission to want more, to be more, to demand more from life. I'd started dating, casually, not because I was looking for another relationship. God knew I wasn't ready for that, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be interesting, to have someone lean forward and actually listen when I spoke. One man, Richard, a retired teacher I'd met at a bookstore reading, had asked me to dinner 3 times now. We talked about books and music and travel, and he never once interrupted me or checked his phone or made me feel like my thoughts were less important than his. "You seem different," he'd said after our last dinner. "More present. Like you're really here, you know?" I'd smiled. "I am here. For the first time in a long time, I'm actually here." The house in the suburbs, the one I'd shared with David for 28 years, was up for sale too. Too many ghosts. Too many memories that turned sour in hindsight. I'd already found a smaller place closer to downtown Portland, a charming old apartment with big windows and exposed brick and enough room for just me and my books and the life I was building on my own terms. I'd reconnected with old friends, people I'd drifted away from over the years of marriage and motherhood and comfortable routine. We met for wine and laughter and conversations that went late into the night. They'd been shocked by my story, outraged on my behalf, but they'd also celebrated my victories. The trial, the money, the reclaiming of my life. "You're like a phoenix," my friend Lisa had said, raising her glass, "rising from the ashes of that bastard's lies." Not everyone was supportive. Some people, mostly David's family, thought I'd been too harsh, too unforgiving. His mother had called me cruel for pursuing the case against Catherine, said I was tarnishing David's memory, that I should have let him rest in peace. I'd listened politely, then explained that David had forfeited his right to peace the moment he decided to betray everything we'd built together. She'd hung up on me. I hadn't called back. The truth was, I didn't need everyone to understand. I didn't need approval or validation from people who wanted me to stay quiet and grateful and appropriately mournful. I'd spent enough years being who other people needed me to be. On a Sunday morning in September, almost a year after David's death, I drove to the cemetery alone. I hadn't been back since the funeral, hadn't felt any pull to visit his grave, but something in me needed closure, needed to stand there one last time and say goodbye, not to the man I'd loved, but to the version of myself who'd loved him. His headstone was simple. David Michael Harrison, 1971-2024, beloved father. Emma had chosen the inscription. I'd let her, because at least that part was true. He had loved her in his way. He'd just been incapable of loving me the way I deserved. I stood there in the cool autumn air, leaves crunching under my feet, and I didn't cry. I'd cried enough. Instead, I spoke out loud, my voice steady and clear. "I don't forgive you. I probably never will. You took 32 years of my life and made them a lie. You stole my trust, my money, my sense of self. You made me question everything I thought I knew about love and marriage and partnership. But you didn't destroy me. You thought you could leave me with nothing, but you were wrong. I'm still here, and I'm stronger now than I was when you were alive." A breeze rustled through the trees, scattering leaves across the grass. I took one last look at the headstone, then turned and walked back to my car. On the way home, I stopped at my favorite coffee shop, bought a latte and a chocolate croissant, and sat by the window watching people go by. A young couple holding hands, an old man reading the newspaper, a woman about my age walking a golden retriever. Ordinary lives, unfolding moment by moment. I used to think ordinary was boring, that passion and drama were what made life worth living. Now I understood that ordinary was a gift, the luxury of truth, of simplicity, of knowing exactly who you are and what you want. I had plans now. School in the spring, a new apartment to decorate, trips I wanted to take, Italy, Ireland, places I dreamed about but never had the courage to visit. Emma was coming for Thanksgiving, and we'd cook together in my new kitchen, start building new traditions that weren't haunted by David's ghost. I wasn't the woman I'd been a year ago. That Sarah, kind, accommodating, willing to settle for comfort over happiness, was gone. In her place was someone harder, but also freer, someone who'd walked through fire and come out forged into something new. People sometimes ask if I regret the 32 years I spent with David. The honest answer is complicated. I don't regret Emma. I don't regret the small moments that were genuine, the Sunday mornings and shared laughter and the ways we built a life together, even if that life was only real on my side. But I do regret not asking more questions, not demanding more honesty, not insisting on being a full partner instead of a convenient companion. I regret settling, and I'll never settle again. My husband's heart stopped beating in my arms, and in that moment, I learned he'd been wearing someone else's ring, living someone else's life, planning someone else's future. It broke me open, but here's what he didn't count on. It also set me free. I'm 55 years old. I have half my life still ahead of me, and this time, I'm living it for myself.